Hey everyone, my name's Jessie. Welcome back to my channel. Today I am sitting in my office space, my guest bedroom, because we are just going to do a very chill March wrap-up video. If you don't know, I am in my third trimester of my pregnancy and I'm just feeling a little lazy. Not doing my normal setup, and I have my big stack of books here from everything that I read in March. Here it is. And I'm just gonna go through them and tell y'all what I thought of them. I think I'm gonna break this out by genre, if I can. So we'll start with the fantasy books that I read last month, and then we'll make our way through all of the different genres, because I got a couple here to talk about. I did manage to read a total of 10 books last month, which is shocking to me. I'm very surprised I was able to get through 10. So that's great. I'll start with a couple rereads from the young adult fantasy genre. So I did read Shadow and Bone and Siege and Storm by Leigh Bardugo last month, because if you don't know, myself, Jashana, and Liene from Liene's Library, we are all doing a reread of this series leading up to the Netflix series coming out for this series. We are all very excited for it. So we have been doing live shows after each of the rereads, and this month we will be doing the live show for Ruin and Rising on my channel. I will have information for that linked down below, as well as Jashana and Liene's channels, so that you can go check them out. They are fantastic. But this has been such a blast being back in this world with these characters. I loved this series the first time that I read it through, and I'm happy to report that I still love it, even upon a second read 6 years after my first read. It is very tropey. It is quite young. The characters are definitely acting like their age, but I love them, and I think that this world is so much fun. I just love it. I love how fast-paced these books are. They're so easy to get through. I would highly recommend checking these out, but I know a lot of people don't love them as much as I do. So it's been really fun though, being back in this world, and I'm very excited to see how this trilogy ends, because I have no recollection at all of the third book. So that will be fun. And another young adult fantasy that I read last month was The Gilded Ones by Namina Forna. This was highly anticipated for me. I was so excited to read this last year, and then it got pushed back to this year. So I was very excited to finally be picking this one up. And I will say that this was pretty good. I really liked the setup for this one. If you don't know what this is about, it's about a girl named Decca who is kind of an outcast in her village, and they have this ceremony every year where they test the girls in the village. They test their blood to see if their blood runs pure. So if their blood runs red, they're pure, and if their blood runs gold, that means they have like some demon in them, and they're pretty much outcast from that village and subject to the death mandate. But Decca gets this opportunity to go join this army of girls who are exactly like her, whose blood runs gold. And so she kind of gets thrown into this military and finds out some truths about her world that she didn't realize. I really like the setup. I really like the world building, and I will say the friendships between the main character and some of the other girls that she meets were really fun to follow. I love seeing like really strong friendships between women in these books. I think that's so much fun to read about. I was also surprised by the tone of this book, because it was interesting how I think at some points this book read very young. There is a romance in this book that I thought was pretty underdeveloped, and thought it made it lean more towards the younger side of young adult. But then there would be some pretty graphic violent scenes thrown in that would make the tone seem much older. So there was kind of these conflicting tones in the book, where at some points I thought it read quite young. At other points I was like, wow, that was really graphic for a young adult book. So I had mixed feelings on that. And then, like I said, the romance for me just, It didn't seem quite necessary in this book. I actually would have much rathered it have been a friendship, especially in this first book, maybe more development towards that relationship kind of blossoming, but it seemed to be very insta-lovey, and I'm not a huge fan of that in my books personally. And then the ending of this one. The ending was very disappointing because it almost undid or made me rethink the rest of the book that I had read thus far. And I don't know how else to explain it without spoilers. I'm going to kind of just leave it at, I didn't love what the ending did for the rest of this book, and for that reason, it knocked this book down in my head in terms of enjoyment, because I just was like very confused all of the sudden, where I hadn't been confused at all up to that point. And then something happens, something's revealed, and I kind of just asked myself why like the rest of the book had happened the way it had. So that was kind of disappointing. I will say though that I am interested enough to see where the sequel goes for this one. So I do plan on picking up the sequel whenever it does come out, because I'm very curious, especially after all of the crazy twists and turns that happened at the end. But I just didn't love how it didn't really explain the rationale behind what led up to that ending, if that makes sense. Overall, again, I thought this was pretty good. I really liked the world, the characters, some of the relationships. There's an animal companion that is so precious in this book, and I do recommend the audiobook if you are an audiobook listener. I kind of did both, where I physically read and listened to the audiobook, and the audiobook narrator was fantastic. Okay, a couple of adult fantasy books now. So the first one I have to talk about is The Broken Eye by Brent. This is the third book in the Lightbringer series, and if you didn't know, I loved the first two books in the Lightbringer series. Both of them were like easily loved it status. This third book took me a really long time to read. It is really large, but it just felt to me like it dragged the most, and I didn't understand why I wasn't connecting to it nearly as much as the first two books. It didn't necessarily do anything wrong, but it just didn't capture me the same way the first two books did, and I'm very conflicted as to why. For most of this book, I was pretty darn bored, and that was such a shock to me. I'm so sad to say that because I loved the first two books so much. So this one ended up just being pretty good for me. I still overall enjoyed it because I really was invested in these characters and this magic system and this world prior to even going into this book. But just the direction of the plot, some of the characters and where they're at, I just didn't love. And I'm so sad. I'm hoping that the fourth book kind of brings this series back into my heart and makes me love it again, because I was having a ton of fun with this series prior to this book. So I'm curious if anyone else had a similar experience with the third book, or if like the third book's your favorite. I've seen a lot of people love the third book, so I was very confused as to why I wasn't loving it. Now, a book that I was not disappointed in at all was Ruin by Gwynne, the third book in the Faithful and the Fallen series. Oh my god, this series just keeps getting better and better. It is so fantastic. I can't talk too much, obviously, about specific plots or things that happen in this book. I really don't even want to mention specific characters, because this is definitely a series where the author is not afraid to kill off main characters and pull some pretty shocking twists and turns with characters. He also introduces a lot of characters kind of midway through the book. So I don't even really want to talk specific characters. All I can say is if you like epic fantasy with all of those classic fantasy tropes, if you like prophecies and kind of turning a prophecy and a chosen one trope on its head, please check out this series. It does have a huge cast of characters, so it is definitely one that I would recommend pretty much reading back to back if you can, because there's so much going on. It's so expansive. This world is humongous and I love it. The characters are the best. The action scenes, John Gwynne writes some of the best action scenes in fantasy that I have ever read. I'm not a visual reader typically, but he is able to make me visualize some of these battles and some of these moments so clearly in my mind. There is one scene in particular in this book that had me bawling. There's one that had me actually like cheering out loud. Fantastic. This has some of my favorite scenes in any fantasy book I've ever read. Truly, like the best. So this is definitely one that is probably, this series is going to go down as one of my all-time favorites if Wrath doesn't kind of mess it up, but I highly doubt Wrath will mess it up. I've heard amazing things about the final book in this quartet, so I'm just so nervous to read Wrath after everything that happened in this book. I am so scared for these characters, but I know that John Gwynne is going to do a phenomenal job wrapping all of this up. I'm very nervous to see how he does it, but I'm very excited. And then the last fantasy book I have to talk about was the Shelf Space Book Club pick for the month of March, where we had a live show with Erin from Booked and Busy, whose channel I will link down below, as well as the live show that we had for this book, and it was Fate of the Fallen by Kade. This was not for me at all. I really didn't enjoy this book. I'm very, very bummed. I heard it was definitely more of a light-hearted story that has the chosen one trope, but very much turns it on its head, and I have to agree, it does definitely take the chosen one trope and does something very unique with it. However, I think it relied a little too heavily on that gag that it had kind of as its premise, and the rest of the story just did not work for me. Oh, I think he's getting comfortable. You gonna get comfortable? You getting comfortable? Yeah? You can lay down. You can lay down. I'm just filming. There we go. Okay. I thought the beginning was the strongest part of this book for sure, and then it kind of just went downhill. I thought it's very short, but I thought it needed at least 100 more pages to flush out the world, the characters, motivations. Just it had no particular climax that we were working towards. There was this scene at the end where a character powers up for apparently like no good reason. Like it was a very unearned power up. This world, I think, actually breaks its own rules in this book, because this book definitely has a prophecy that we're following, but then we find out that in this world, prophecies are just interpretations, and so it just contradicts itself a lot, and I found some of the humor pretty darn immature. It just didn't work for me. I'm really bummed about this one. So yeah, unfortunately, not for me. Erin and I both kind of agreed that this was not like the strongest for either of us. I think she is continuing on in the series though, so I'll be curious to see what she thinks of it, but I will not be continuing on with this series, unfortunately, so sorry, Fate of the Fallen. All right, so I have one nonfiction book that I would really, really like to talk about because I thought it was absolutely life-changing, and I would highly recommend anyone read this. It is called Digital Minimalism: Choosing a Focused Life in a Noisy World by Newport. I am looking to kind of reduce social media in my own life. That's not to say that I think social media is in any way bad. I mean, here I am on YouTube. I obviously like interacting online with a lot of folks that I've met through social media, so there's definitely huge benefits to it, huge pluses, but it's just something that I spend a lot of time on in my life and was looking to kind of find some tips and tricks for reducing the amount of time I spend on social media. And this book definitely did the trick. What I really like about this book is it explains things in a way that you never thought about before, and it doesn't feel too preachy. It has some very specific steps that it provides that you can take to kind of reduce the impact, the negative impacts of social media in your own life. But it does recognize at the same time some of the benefits that come from social media. So it's not like it's trying to preach to you that all social media is bad and should just be completely taken away. It's just asking you to more of examine within yourself the benefits that you find come from social media and how to minimize it to maximize the benefits and minimize the consequences. Probably if you look intrinsically, there are probably some consequences that come from spending so much time on social media. That's definitely, for me, was the case. And so it really makes you kind of reflect and think about your own habits, why you're doing the things you're doing, and how to make more space for the stuff that really matters to you. I think this is fantastic, even if you don't think that you have a problem with social media. This is definitely something that I would still recommend you read because it goes past social media and just talks more generally about technology and kind of our reliance on technology. It's definitely life-changing. And I think what the author does a fantastic job of is recognizing that there's no one perfect solution for each person. It's definitely based on your own individual circumstances, your own individual values and beliefs, and what you use social media for. And that's what will drive kind of the solutions you should take to maximize your productivity and just your happiness in life. So go check it out if this sounds interesting to you. And then I have 3 thrillers to talk about. So we will start with When the Sky Goes Dark by Oliver C. Seneca, which was so kindly sent to me by the author. So thank you so much, Oliver, for sending this to me. This follows a boy who is in college, and he quickly realizes that there is something going wrong with the other students on campus. There's all of a sudden these very violent acts and displays kind of from some of the students and some of the faculty on campus that seem very out of character for a lot of people. And then he realizes that these kinds of events are not just isolated to his college campus, but are actually happening on a more global scale. And so there's this mystery of what is happening to these people to make them this way, to make them act out and very, very violent towards each other. So this very much felt like a thriller horror book that definitely leaned on more slasher type of horror than anything else, I would say. And for me, I don't love slasher movies or slasher books typically, so some of this didn't really work for me. However, I will say that if you do like more slasher horror books, then this one is definitely a very fast-paced novel. It has a really good mystery that keeps you intrigued and keeps you turning the pages. It's written in a way that's very easy to digest and has very visual imagery that is very clear to the reader what's going on. The author's writing style definitely makes it to where you almost can see a movie going on in your mind, how he's describing some of these scenes. Some of them were very, very tense. I will say, if you are not a fan of very graphic violence and very graphic language, I would proceed with caution with this one. There was a lot of really graphic language in this book throughout the entire thing, and there were some really, really gross scenes, very gross. And again, I think just me not being a slasher horror fan, That is why some of this didn't work for me, but I think that was the intention of the book, was to make you kind of squirm in your seat, and it definitely did that. It almost reminded me a lot of The Happening, that movie with like Mark Wahlberg. I think it was like an M. Night Shyamalan movie. I don't even remember when I watched that, but for some reason this book really reminded me of The Happening. So if you like The Happening movie, I think you would like this book. So overall, even though this wasn't for me, I am glad I read it, and I definitely think that if you like slasher horror, if you don't mind some really graphic scenes, and if you like that kind of mystery element and trying to figure out kind of what's going wrong with the population, then this is one that I would recommend you pick up. The next thriller I have to talk about is A Nearly Normal Family by M.T. Edvardsson. So this is more of a legal thriller, so it's completely different than the last one I talked about that was much more horror. This is not horror at all. This is definitely following a family where the daughter of this family ends up being in the wrong place at the wrong time and ends up being convicted as the primary suspect for this murder case. And so she is going through a court trial, and kind of at the same time as that storyline, you're also getting a lot of backstory and kind of what led up to her being convicted in the first place. So you're kind of following two separate timelines in this book. I actually really enjoyed this one. This was very good for me, but I really like legal thrillers. I really like books that have court trials in them. I find them fascinating. I thought the structure of this novel, we started out with the dad's perspective at the beginning, and that's kind of what introduced us to the setup of the story. And then we got the daughter's perspective, which is what introduced us to kind of the backstory of what led up to the court case, and then we get the mother's perspective at the end. I thought the structure of this novel was perfect. I really liked it, and it made it stand out in my mind quite a lot from a lot of other thrillers that I've read. So I thought the execution of this one was really good. I did not know how it was going to turn out. I thought the actual murder and everything that led up to the murder was really fascinating to follow. So if you like legal thrillers, if you like these kinds of family dramas, and you like books that follow these court cases, I would highly recommend this one. It was really good. I really liked the characters. I really liked the structure of it, and the twist at the end was great. So overall, highly recommend. Very good. I'm trying to take off the sticker from this last book, and it's not peeling off. We love to see it. We love to see it. As you can see, I got this from a local bookstore. Don't need to see the price. This is Long Bright River by Liz Moore, the last book that I read in the month of March. And overall, I thought this one was pretty good. I liked the overall storyline of this. I thought the writing was really well done. I thought the execution of this book was great. I just, for some reason, didn't connect as much to just the plot in general. This follows a woman who is a cop, and she is working in a neighborhood where there are a lot of drug issues, and you find out that she has a sister who is very much addicted to drugs and has been out on the street. And this is kind of the reason why she becomes a cop in the first place. She had these experiences in the past with her sister, just has wanted a better life for her sister. And so it's very much at the heart of this story is this sister relationship. In the present day, her sister has gone missing, and so this woman takes it upon herself to kind of follow these different leads and try to find her sister. You get flashbacks of these sisters' lives kind of prior to the present day timeline, where they were growing up together. You kind of find out that some other stuff happened with our main character that led her to make some certain decisions. I was definitely invested the entire time while I was reading this book. I really, really wanted to know what was going to happen, and I just wanted the best for these two women. But that being said, once I finished the book, it was definitely something that kind of quickly left my mind. I don't think that this is something that for me was anything like super special. Enjoyed my time while reading it, but it's not going to leave like a lasting impression on me, if that makes sense. It was kind of just one of those books that was like, yeah, I'm glad I read that. All right, moving on. So I don't know if anyone else has those kinds of books, but it's a very weird feeling because you're like, I know that was good. I just don't know why I don't like it more then. So yeah, very, very weird feelings about this book. But overall, I would highly recommend it, especially if you like those stories that examine these families and these traumas and these sister relationships. I thought all of that was really well done. So I still highly recommend this one. It just, for me, just didn't have that emotional connection. And with that, my dog is out. So that is all of the books that I read in the month of March. Did you see any that you've read before? What did you think of the ones that you've read before? What was your best read in the month of March? I would love to know. So thank you all so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, make sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe if you'd like to, and I will see you all in my next one. Bye!